Welcome to this episode of Kingology with your host Mark. Today we're going to be doing our 12th instalment in this list. So we're rounding out our first year of Kingology with the novel Cujo. I'll also be talking about the movie. Okay, well, Cujo. This is a first time read for me. Apart from, I think, Backman's Roadwork, this is the first book in this series which I haven't read before. And most of the ones before this I've read several times. I just never really fancied this one. It just didn't appeal to me. And I just felt the idea of a sort of some Bernard, the big bad monster, just couldn't possibly work. It was more the film, the thought of the film actually than the book, but I just never got around to it. However, I'm reading it. It's kind of an interesting read. It was published first in 1981. It was, I think it was a pretty good seller. It won various awards, and it concerns a rabid dog. I believe it was inspired when King was his mother commented to him, "Why don't you write something nice about, like, a family dog or something like that?" So of course he wrote the one about the family dog, but in King's world, the family dog's rabid. And it's one he's already commented on and saying he barely remembers writing it at all. Apparently it was written during a period where King was drinking a lot. However, you wouldn't know that from the writing. It's very coherent writing. The story meanders around a bit, but we allow King that because he's so good at character and so on. And we're just, as any King reader is kind of familiar with his kind of, I don't plan things, the muse takes me and that's where we go. And I liked it. I really had trouble with the ending though, which this is going to be spoilers from this point. I think, because I'm going to be talking about the ending a fair bit during this. And if you haven't read it and want to read it, this will spoil the ending for you. Okay. I really didn't like the fact the little boy died at the end. It really felt like a kick in the balls. I felt the same way about this ending as I did about the film version of the Mist. The ending of that really annoyed me because it just didn't feel like a proper catharsis of the story. I could have understood if the wife had died because she had, she was a sinner, as it were, by being an adulteress. But the boy, it didn't work for me so well. There was definitely some interesting stuff about the Cambers and their interrelationships and the family stuff, but it was kind of a subplot, really. They weren't that interesting compared to the main plot. And I was kind of intrigued reading this book when about a third, or maybe a little more than a third of the way through, the woman and the boy are trapped in the car, and it felt like, wow, how is this going to play out for so long? There's so much of the book left, but actually it paid off pretty well. I didn't feel King was padding it in any way. And even when he went off topic, and I mean the two main ways he was off topic were, well, there were three actually. They were talking about the Cambers, Charity and Brett, was it? The son being away visiting her sister. There was that bit. There was the two admin doing their shtick to try and recover their account, and there was also the jealous ex-lover Kemp and his shenanigans, which was only a little bit of the book, but all of those sort of took you away from the horror of the attack by the dog. In fact, talking about the ending of the book and having problems with it, I really felt I needed to watch film because I believed that a filmmaker would never make a film where that little boy dies at the end. Or it'd be a very unusual filmmaker to do that. And it was kind of a B movie, I think, but it was mainstream, I'd say. So I couldn't believe the little boy was going to end. In fact, it doesn't. So in fact, I got kind of it got redeemed for me by watching the movie, in fact, which was interesting. We'll get back to the movie in a bit though. The writing style was pretty solid. It certainly wasn't anywhere close to my favourite of any King books or any of the set I've read so far. I'm trying to think where it would rank. I preferred it above Roadwork, certainly. But apart from that, this is probably my lowest pick of the ones I've seen so far. Having said that, it's still a pretty damn good book, which kind of gives you an idea of the quality of the books we've read I've discussed so far. Roadwork was the least interesting to me so far. I prefer Cujo to that. So, of the King rather than the Bachman books so far, this is my least preferred, but it's still decent. It's still a decent story. I like the fact that he actually got you into the dog mindset for the early part of the narrative, and it was quite amazing that he could like persuade you were seeing from a dog's point of view, and slightly less successfully from a rabid dog point of view, but you could kind of follow it still. You could kind of understand what was going on. But it was, the whole Kemp thing was very odd. The only plot driver in that, him going back and destroying things, was the fact he rubbed out the message which said where she'd gone. And I thought that was going to emerged at the end to sort of say, well, he was ultimately responsible. But that point is never made actually in the book, or certainly not significantly. So I was expecting that to come back into the story, but it didn't. There you go. So overall, a decent enough book, good read. I'm glad I read it. I may read it again, but I can't see it being a reread the way, say, The Long Walk or Dance Macabre or what most of the early ones will be rereads. I will go back to them at some point. Cujo, I may visit once more, but that might be about it. I probably won't know, frankly, having said that. Yeah, there were flaws, I think. The Kemp thing didn't really. I thought Kemp was going to go and find him actually once he saw the message, and his kind of comeuppance would have been a nice touch, but it kind of was okay as it was. Okay, that's about it for the book. Really, it was okay. It was a solid book. No great shakes compared to the best of the ones we've read so far, though. The film was only made 2 years later. 1983, directed by Louis Teague, who I think he was famous for directing a few other kind of interesting kind of films. Let me just look up his he directed Cat's Eye, which I thought was a pretty solid adaptation. So we've watched one of these already, and I think it was probably his work in that persuaded him that he could do something with Cujo. Now, I really wasn't expecting much of this film. It was, as I said, on the written page, you can sort of forget he's a Saint Bernard and kind of understand he's a monster. But in this, he's a Saint Bernard. All right, he might be covered in blood, he might be foaming at the mouth, he might have, be snarling. But it's a Saint Bernard. It makes it really difficult. However, I was quite impressed with how the director cut it to make it more scary. There was a very effective sequence towards the end of the first act where Joe Camber has to face off the dog, and he realises he's rabid, and you can see the fear in his face when he realises he's trying to tackle a rabid dog. It's the rabies, not the dog, that's sort of scaring him, which is really quite effective. But it pulled off okay. There were some shots where you think, oh, that's a St. Bernard, but because he cut fast, that he didn't do that many mid-range shots of Cujo when the attacks were happening. It kind of worked. It was all close up something, which gave it a certain more visceral feel. So it kind of worked. It was quite. I think he did the best anyone could probably do for making a St. Bernard scary, actually. So it was a decent enough film. It's got on IMDb, it scores 6, and I'd give it a 6. I think that's a pretty decent score. It's nice pace. A lot of stuff was cut out. Basically, Kemp, instead of being a 5-time, they'd done it 5 times and that was it. And he was a tennis pro who was a really bad sport. He didn't shake hands if he lost and things like that. They made him and the husband tennis partners, it appeared. And it suggested the affair was had been going on for some time, and it was more of a a regular thing than the book suggested. They excised quite well in this and got the major beats and changed the story enough so that it worked for a movie without changing the spirit of the book. So I kind of like it. Apparently King really liked this on when he saw it. I think he said at the point of seeing it, it was his favourite adaptation to that point. So he liked this better than say The Shining or Salem's Lot or Carrie even, which is interesting. It's a much lesser film. It's a strictly a B movie compared to those, but it's an interesting point for it. I thought it was a decent enough version of the story. Actually, kind of liked it. It grossed. It did pretty well at box office too. It was the fourth highest grossing horror film in 1983, so not bad at all. It's often either not discussed. Well, it's usually not discussed when movies about King adaptations discussed. It's usually comparing the best and the worst, and the best usually is stuff like Carrie and The Shining, and the worst is stuff. Maximum Overdrive often comes up, but I don't agree with that. I think it's such an entertaining film, and King made it when he was hopped up on coke or something. It was kind of a very, very fun film. There's duller films, I think, made out of King works. However, yeah, Cujo was pretty solid. I rather enjoyed it. So next on the list, number 13, starting the second year of Kingology, will be a Bachman book, The Running Man, and I'll be covering the movie in that too. Bye from me.